Marci, first of all, thank you for joining us and help to clear up some of the most misconceptions and information from one of the most impassioned board meetings we've had in recent memories. But it's a very important one. This is obviously going to be a blueprint of what Clark County is going to look like in the future.
That's correct, Randy, it is. And we're really interested in making sure that as we look at future population projections and we take a look at the kinds of services, the kind of housing, the kind of development that we need to have here to facilitate that population growth, that we're planning for that future occurrence now. We need to make sure that we're ahead of the curve and that we are looking towards the future in terms of identifying additional land to be developed and what kind of services and amenities need to be provided there.
Let's talk about a couple numbers here, if we would, Marci. 44,000 acres of public land was designated for development and 300,000 acres set aside for conservation. Talk about both of those pieces of land.
Correct. In looking at our planning needs, we identified the need for about 44,000 additional acres of land that's currently BLM. It's under multiple use management. And we were looking at parts of Southern Nevada that are contiguous with the current BLM, Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act disposal boundary, and areas that would help us also achieve some of our future economic development goals. So when you look at additional land needs and then locations of those lands, that's how we identified that additional 44,000 acres. And the way Clark County approaches these kinds of land bills is to make sure that we balance out future economic development with additional conservation opportunities. And that's where the 300,000 acres comes in. So we took a look at lands, also Bureau of Land Management lands that are currently designated as multiple use. And we looked at where are areas that contain habitat and species that will be impacted by the development of the 44,000 acres, and how do we bring those lands into conservation status. And we're not just mitigating and offsetting development for the 44,000 acres, but also all of the remaining land that's in Southern Nevada in private land, or the remaining 30,000 acres in BLM disposal that need to be mitigated for. So when you add all that up, it amounts to roughly 300,000 acres.
You've mentioned BLM many times already in this discussion, and obviously the BLM is kind of forcing, or these decisions have to be made with several different levels of government included, including the BLM, of course.
Yeah, the BLM is by far our biggest land administrator here in Southern Nevada. They manage 3 million acres here in Southern Nevada. And so we are constantly coordinating with the Bureau of Land Management on local land use activities. So whether that's offering additional recreational opportunities on BLM land, which is so important here in Southern Nevada, not only for residents, but for tourist opportunities as well. And then just infrastructure and development needs. So even if you have a private parcel, the chances are you're going to be running across BLM land to put in your road or your pipeline. So there's just a lot of almost daily interaction between local governments and Bureau of Land Management. And having a good partnership with the BLM and working together with them is essential to meeting our future obligations for growth and development and conservation here in Southern Nevada.
Some of the things you said quite often, and you touched on this briefly, that there's 3 or 4 uses for every piece of land that's out there, and competing interests. Talk a little bit about that, and give us some examples of that.
Sure. Yeah, it looks like we still have a ton of vacant, undisturbed land here in Clark County, and looks are deceiving. So there are probably 3 or 4 uses that are already counted for on every acre that you see. So that includes what Clark County would like to see in terms of additional economic development. It includes recreational users, so folks who want to do motorized or non-motorized transportation. Solar has had a big impact on land use here in Southern Nevada, and that will continue to be the case. And so when we were really looking at the maps and trying to figure out where can additional development go, what do we preserve for recreational opportunities, how are we going to fit solar into this picture, we were constantly meeting with folks who were saying, well, we were looking at that same area for something else. We were looking at it for an OHV race. Well, we were looking at it to develop solar. The county and the city of Henderson are looking at it for future economic development. And so it's really kind of putting all those puzzle pieces together and making sure that everyone gets something. We probably all don't get exactly what we want, but trying to reduce conflicts as much as possible and yet maintain all of the goals that we have it's been complicated, but I think we've come a long way.
And obviously, along the way, many of these stakeholders, all of these stakeholders, have had opportunities to talk to you and participate. Let's talk a little bit about the OHV community. They're very impassioned, and sure, people have been riding their off-highway vehicles in washes or pieces of desert, I'm sure, for years, maybe decades and things. And now all of a sudden, wow, you're the bad guy and telling them they can't go there anymore. It's not that simple.
It's not. And, you know, my heart does go out to the OHV community because this is something that, you know, their families grow up doing. Their grandfather did it, their dad. You know, they want to pass that on to their children. And so I certainly understand needing to maintain places for OHV recreation to occur. And so, in terms of OHV recreation, there's a lot of places that folks can still recreate. I think what we need to do here in Southern Nevada is a better job at not telling people where they can't go, but telling people where they can go. And so we have been working really hard with the Bureau of Land Management, the Nevada OHV Commission, and individual users and organized groups at you know, making sure that better maps are available, that we do a better job in outreach, making sure that websites are available that show OHV recreators where they can go. So just in areas of critical environmental concern alone, there's about 1,500 miles of OHV roads that can be used. And that doesn't count all of the rest of the BLM multiple use lands and what these future areas of environmental concern would offer as well. And so really the pinch point comes down to OHV racing. And so that's one of the reasons why Commissioner Kirkpatrick advanced this OHV committee to advise the county on where is racing currently occurring and how do we preserve opportunity for OHV racing in the future. And I think we can do that. It might not look exactly the same as it does today, but I think there are opportunities to preserve racetracks and make sure that those kinds of uses can continue on in the future.
I didn't see Mojave Max or any of his critter friends there, but plenty of people that support everything for the multi-species habitat conservation plan, which was also very vital in your decision making also, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So we're required to have a habitat conservation plan and a federal permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for almost any land that's developed in Southern Nevada, and that has to do with the listing of the desert tortoise. So once the desert tortoise was listed in the early 1990s, that required this permitting and habitat conservation plan. So anytime you're doing anything with land, you have to make sure that you're matching your permitting with what your plans are for that land, because it doesn't do you any good to identify additional land for development if you don't have it permitted. So one of the things that was really important about this proposal was making sure that we had the companion piece of these conservation areas that would be set aside and could be used to mitigate for species that are in the multiple species habitat conservation plan, and that we would have that permitting mechanism available to us as this development occurs.
Some misconceptions watching this meeting were people thinking perhaps that we're not good stewards of public land, and nothing could be further than the truth. You look back historically, what we've set aside for the Ivanpah Airport, Sniplama lands, Tule Springs, and also Sloan Canyon, we are good stewards of public land. And these are tough decisions to make, but vital ones that we are looking in the future and doing it collaboratively.
Yeah, the county and all the local land use jurisdictions, we have a really good track record at supporting conservation and responsible management of public lands and balancing that with what we're doing in terms of development here in Clark County. So, you know, when I travel to planning conferences or environmental technical conferences, people are amazed at what we're doing here in Clark County. You know, the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan alone is responsible for setting aside and authorizing over $123 million in conservation projects. Most of those projects have occurred on federal lands, and they've benefited habitats and species that are being impacted elsewhere by development. No other community in the country has set aside that kind of funding for conservation. And again, it's really important to the county and the other cities that we have this balance of economic development and conservation. And so that's why the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan, has been so widely supported here in Southern Nevada. And it's really an envy of a lot of other communities that we go and visit with and talk about.
The vote was about a month and a half ago. We're taping this in early August now. What's next, Marci?
What's next is to start drafting legislation along with our allies and folks who express interest in being a part of that process. And so those discussions have begun in earnest. And the next step would be to provide that draft language to the Nevada delegation and look for opportunities to work with all of the people who expressed interest in being a part of the process to advance legislation back in Washington, D.C.
All right. Well, we'll definitely talk to you a lot more about that as time goes on into the summer and fall. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.